before we start, a grade piece that's in your packet. Nice summary of some actions around the country on this issue of tenure. And it's intriguing to me that, well, I would say for the last 15, 20 years, we've had an academic conversation about tenure. Those conversations were not really connected to policy. We saw very little action, a lot of conversation. But as this paper represents, and you can see that has all changed. Tenure is open for debate. It's open for debate because our system is open for debate. Tenure is a part of this broader conversation in this country about how we can better serve our children. We made a commitment that we are going to educate our children to very high levels of understanding for preparedness for society. We know that their individual futures and our societal future rest on our ability to ratchet up our education system. And so, when we begin to make those kinds of lofty commitments, people get asked questions. Are we prepared to reach these standards? Is this system organized in a way that can get us to the future that we desire? And I think the answer to that is, many people have determined, at least in policy circles, that no, we need to openly debate these issues, openly consider what we have inherited, and begin to think about how we can create a future that leads to right opportunity for every child. So we're going to talk about this, and heretofore, these two individuals are going to be known as Bill and Andy. And so we're going to take some perspectives on this. But to set a context, I want to start. Bill, let's talk a bit about why we even have tenure. Why is it even necessary? Why do we have this reading this morning of these pretty tedious procedures that are in place?
Sure, thanks, and I'm really pleased to be here. You'll hear in my voice a Minnesota accent. I'm a native of Minnesota, and we actually in Minnesota, I spent a lot of time dealing with this issue, and actually our law is pretty similar to what you have right now. So let me start by saying that I think it's important that we look at the whole system of education. And I think we have to always ask ourselves, where is the most important lever? And so one of the things you'll probably hear me say throughout, and I'll get to your question in a minute, Gene, one of the things you'll hear me say throughout is, what is the most important lever? And is this the most important lever that we have to focus our attention on? But tenure was put in place generally because there were lots of acts against good teachers and just bad decisions made to get rid of good teachers. Tenure was originally put in place to protect teachers, so they had some level of academic freedom, so they had some level of academic inquiry in their class, and so that they weren't penalized by that level of academic inquiry and freedom. It also was put in place because there were a whole level of discriminations that were going on in the school systems that we said, you know, we really shouldn't have those in our school system. So today there's the debate, do we have enough laws, other kinds of laws, so we no longer need tenure? And my answer would be, we clearly still need a level of due process for school employees for this reason. We don't need it for poor teachers, we really need it for the good teachers. We need it for the good teachers so that they can really feel comfortable in their class, being creative. In today's world where we're going to be implementing new standards and asking teachers to be really creative in implementing new standards to make sure that students learn what they need to learn, we have to have teachers have the freedom, the ability to experiment at some level. And you know what, to even make a mistake now and again without feeling like any mistake is going to result in some kind of discipline issue. So I think it's about, in today's world, I really think it's about the creation of an atmosphere where teachers feel really comfortable in implementing strategies that make a difference for kids. I also will argue a lot later on that I think there are more important levers for us to look at. Even if we would say that 10% of teachers should be a victim of a lack of tenure, the question is, what do we do for the 90% of the folks who are really being successful in the classroom? How do we support them? So I think that's an important issue for us to talk about as we move forward.
So, and protections for teachers. Are these real? And so why are we having this conversation?
Well, excuse me, asset in the bill, which is the grown-ups who are teaching boys and girls. Is that better?
Yes.
Yeah, so, of the percent rate on this, these types of rules hamstring great administrators, great principals, great district superintendents for managing their human capital in a way that is in the best interest of my point two, kids. Nowhere in this sheet you will notice, I couldn't find the word student, boy, girl, kid, anywhere. Tenure, unfortunately, is part of a big system of rules and regulations that are, that's how I just simply refer to it. Are they interested in grown-ups, or are they interested in kids? And this is completely an adult-centered set of policies. Now, to Bill's points, I need to concede because they're actually true, the first two that he made. Number one is there was a time, decades and decades ago, where teachers routinely were kicked out of the classroom for reasons that they shouldn't. And the second is that they needed some sort of academic freedom and they were kicked out for those types of reasons. Discrimination, academic freedom, that is part of our history, and I think there was a thoughtful, logical, sensible reaction to that. However, we now have other things in place that kind of take care of those. As Bill preference, we do have this wide-ranging set of new laws, new as in decades old now, banning discrimination when it comes to race and to gender and to disability and so forth. We also have a whole set of workplace rules, making sure that the work conditions that teachers have are far better than they were years ago. So if you think about the tenure law, they, like lots of our laws, they were a reaction to their time. That time, about a century ago, is very, very different than it is today. Now, this issue about academic freedom, I appreciate that, but also we have to realize that it is a different era now. When tenure laws were put into place, we didn't have what we now know as firm content standards, saying what boys and girls are supposed to know and learn and be able to do at the end of every school year. So teachers now, they have lanes in which they can run. They know in third grade math what they're supposed to teach by the end of the year. Before we had standards when teachers had to decide for themselves what was in the best interest of boys and girls, you needed this wide-ranging academic freedom. We now have standards, and we have assessments aligned with standards. So that argument is a whole lot less powerful than I think it used to be. The last point I want to make here relate to teacher effectiveness. When tenure laws were put in place, we simply had no data on what we now know to be absolutely undebatably true, which is that there are enormous variations in the levels of effectiveness of teachers. The last 10 years, especially the last 5 years, have shown us that without any question, especially the recent MET study funded by the Gates Foundation. The difference between a great teacher and a low-performing teacher takes your breath away. Unfortunately, tenure rules in every single state that I've seen, including the one that I work in, unfortunately have the effect of protecting the lowest performing teachers for too long. And we know, again, unfortunately, that lowest performing teachers are habitually placed in our lowest income schools and our lowest income classrooms. So as a result of this, tenure laws often have the effect of disadvantaging our most disadvantaged boys and girls.
Right. Just go back, Bill, in a minute or so.
Sure. So,
responses to this?
yeah, just a couple of things in responses. Clearly, all tenure laws have a significant probationary period. In your state, you have 4 years, and it seems to me that if we do a really quality job in the early parts of a teacher's career of assessing whether or not she or he can be successful with students, we have 4 years to determine that without any protections of tenure. And it seems to me that that is the most important time of a teacher's career anyway, to determine whether or not she or he is going to be successful in the classroom. So that is really an important part. So actually tenure laws in a lot of ways not only force but encourage people to do quality assessment of teacher performance early in their careers, to say, this is an important time and we need to engage in those kinds of efforts. The other thing that I will say about tenure with regard to basic laws that are in place, absolutely. But the basic laws that are in place to protect teachers against discrimination do not prevent the whole list of reasons that teachers have been terminated that didn't have tenure that I have here before you and that I could share with you. But I think the more important lever actually is not the issue of tenure, but what do we do in terms of preparation in the early part of the career. We'll talk more about that later.
So, Andy, tenure's in place, and virtually every state. What impact is tenure having on, getting back to your issue around children, the actual learning of children? Because we have tenure in place as it is, what is this causing in a negative sense on the educational system in this country?
So I think Bill and I agree that tenure can't be discussed outside of what I would say the larger quilt of the educator effectiveness policies. So I think we're talking about PD and preparation and so forth. So I think my comments are going to begin to allude to that. So there are the discrete short-term effects that I want to talk about, but I want to talk about the bigger picture effects first of tenure laws. And I think that the tenure rules we have in place, when you combine them with these compensation systems that we have that are lockstep, that just go by the number of years in the classroom and degrees, I think when you combine these two things, it has a tragic influence in deprofessionalizing the teacher profession. Those two things were put in place to professionalize the profession, which I think makes sense. But now lots of people look at the teaching profession because of those two things and say, oh, low-performing teachers can keep their jobs pretty much forever, and it doesn't matter if I'm really, really good, I'm going to get paid the same amount as someone who isn't very good. Well, that's not the kind of profession that I want people to work on. That doesn't even sound like a profession. We are not valuing what is most important, people's ability to do their job really well, and in this case, that means helping boys and girls. So what I'd like to kind of suggest is doing away with tenure as we know it now, doing away with the compensation system as we know them now, can do enormous things, not only for today's teachers, but for tomorrow's teachers, and bringing new types of folks, more people into the teaching profession. The second point is like the discrete, what happens right now in every single state I know, and the one that I worked in for almost 3 years, we were only able as a state to take tenure away from 17 teachers over the span of a decade for offenses that even included amounts to effectiveness. We call it inefficiency, but that's not what we're defining it. Why is that the case? Because these rules, this pinkish orange sheet, although it looks like it's only one page, the sets of policies and practices and regulations and habits that emanate from this provide the most enormous sets of disincentives from superintendents all the way down to principals, assistant principals, department chairs to remove low-performing teachers from the classroom. So yes, this seems like it can be mediated well, but in practice, what it has the effect of is being extraordinarily sticky. And then you have this perverse incentive of administrators to just, Mr. Johnson isn't doing a good job, so be it. We're going to let him go on forever. And districts usually can pay for it, schools can deal with it. But who is the ultimate set of people who get harmed by this? Kids.
Bill Henry's made the argument that this is impeding our ability to move ahead. Why should we hold on to it?
So one of the reasons we should hold on to tenure is to allow teachers, again, to do the kind of work that they need to do in order to be effective in the classroom. To not hamstring them, you talk about hamstring, to not hamstring them would be concerned about the fact that we have new standards and I'm going to have to do exactly what somebody prescribes instead of caring about what's going to happen to students, so that we don't end up having, for example, as we had in New York, a teacher fired for reporting asbestos, potential asbestos in their classroom, and the school district firing them there. So I think that the focus of this, I agree with Andy that the focus of this has to be students, and that as we start thinking about students, we have to think about all of the impacts that we have in the education system. We have spent so much time in this country in the last few years talking about narrow issues rather than talking about the system of education. And so for me, it is really about starting at the initial level of teacher preparation, focusing on the probationary period, however long that is for a teacher, and then ensuring that a teacher is effective throughout their career by providing professional development, the right kinds of supports. And to say that a law is preventing a school administrator from doing her or his job is really something that I think is abhorrent. To think that, well, we have a law in place, therefore I can't do my job. I worked with teachers for 14 years in Minnesota, all across the state, and I can tell you that there were many, many teachers in probationary period and after they became tenured, had due process, that were exited out of schools because they were not being successful. They wouldn't show up on anybody's list because we really worked to ensure that they were being successful with students, and if they weren't, they were exited out of the profession. And so while there's laws in place, there's also what happens in school districts, and generally what happens in school districts, the 100 or so that I worked in across the state of Minnesota, was that if a teacher was not being effective, she or he was ushered out during their probationary period, and or they were exited out during the tenure period because of the fact that they were not effective. And are there examples of really crazy things that have gone on? Absolutely, on all sides of this issue. Again, I argue that we need to continue to focus on the preparation of teachers, their support throughout their career to ensure that they're being quality. When it comes to compensation, Andy, I think that you are right that we need to take a serious look at compensation systems and how they are designed. We may not agree on exactly what that looks like, but I clearly think that we have to provide compensation that allows teachers to build their career, that says to a teacher that we want you to be able to advance in your career without necessarily becoming an administrator, to provide them with opportunities for additional responsibilities in their work, or additional opportunities to engage in mentoring or extended school years, or responsibility for curriculum design. So I think there are great opportunities to look at compensation system. I think our challenge in all of this is that we often look at narrow, discrete issues, and we forget to look at the system entirely. And I would argue that as we look at tenure and only tenure alone, and we think that if we only do X, even if you support tenure reform, think if we only do X, everything will be good, we have a problem. The other thing I'll just finally say is that we have a huge issue with turnover of teachers right now across this country. Huge issue. So the issue is, I think a more important issue is the issue of recruiting and retaining. And if we think we're going to fire ourselves to success, we're kidding ourselves. We're not going to fire ourselves to success in this area. We need to ensure that we recruit, retain, and then provide support as we move forward.
So we need to put words in Bill's mouth. The problem's not him. The problem is implementation. It's a lack of leadership on the part of management, exercising itself. It's poor evaluation system. So why not leave tenure alone and deal with some of these other?
I agree with Bill, but I would say both of the things. But I think that most of the bad practices and bad habits of administrators are a result of the culture that's been created. It's a consequence of the tenure law themselves. When principals and administrators and superintendents realize that it's going to take a year and a half, 2 years, and several $100,000 of lawyers' fees in order to get rid of the persistently low performing teachers, that creates disincentives for them to do it. If the tenure law was much more fluid and enabled them to do what was in the best interest of the kids, I think we would see a change in culture. But it is absolutely true that as it is now, administrators often aren't trained and they aren't known with one another to actually do high-quality observations. They don't have the courage to have tough conversations with teachers who aren't doing a good job. They often don't have support from their superintendents to get rid of the teacher who isn't doing right by boys and girls. So all those things actually do deep things. I would never for a second argue against any of those things. But until you get the statute right, I think you can make progress on that construction.
So listening to the two of you, I've not heard anyone say leave it alone totally. Nor have I heard either one of you say that we should just blankly eliminate it. What I'm hearing is let's modify it. So I'm going to push you a little bit on this. So given, is that assumption right? That both of you are talking about some modification in practice as we move forward. Where would you begin? What kinds of changes do you recommend?
So at some point this becomes just a matter of semantics. Are we retaining the tenure law, or are we getting rid of it and putting something else instead? So I think tenure, as we know it is described on this piece of paper, ought to go away. I think the idea of giving someone an extensive, virtually lifetime job employment after 5 years plus 1 day, 4 years plus 1 day, just doesn't make sense now that we know so much about the life cycle of the teacher's effectiveness, especially when we know that young professionals today move antiquated law, and it's okay to say that. There are lots of other laws that we passed 100 years ago that we would look at now and say, thank goodness we got rid of that. And that represented the progressive era when Teddy Roosevelt was president, not the era today. So that's fine. I totally agree that we need to have some set of provisions in place, call them due process, call them something else, so nefarious things don't happen, so good people aren't kicked out of their jobs. But all of this has to be oriented to this, we have to come back to effectiveness, the best interest of kids, student performance. And so what we've seen in state after state, including in New Jersey and other states, whether because of race to the top or just because of the zeitgeist, the era that we're in, have reformed their tenure laws, evaluation laws, PD laws, compensation laws, to get this exact thing, which is we have to define effectiveness, meaning are kids learning, and through some measure of practice, are teachers doing things that we recognize are good. We have to embed that in a high-quality evaluation system. And then that evaluation system actually has to have consequences. Meaning if you were low-performing, you get the support you need. If you were high-performing, maybe you get more pay, you get more responsibilities. But if you were persistently low-performing on a high-quality teacher evaluation system, you can no longer keep your job. And so that's how I would orient this. Yes, have job protection, make sure bad things don't happen to good people, but keep focusing on student performance above all else, and then you'll see a cascade of effects around that.
Okay, Bill, how would you answer that question?
So I would answer that a lot of what Andy had to say, I would agree with. Clearly, we want to focus on what is best for students. There's no question about that. There's no question about the fact that we need to provide the kind of support for educators to make sure that they're doing what they need to do for students. There's no question about the fact that we need to have due process in place, which generally tenure laws are. So I would start here. I would start with ensuring that preparation programs are adequate to prepare teachers from day one. They're not going to be the best they can be on day one, but they need to be prepared from day one. I would start with a really serious evaluation program during any probationary period that you have and ensure that we have the systems in place. I don't think we should blame administrators for this. I think we should blame this. I do think we should blame the system that we have in place. Administrators have all kinds of responsibilities that often prevent them from getting to the evaluation. So how do we involve peers in the evaluation of teachers? What kind of peer assessments and reviews do we have? What kinds of mentoring programs do we put in place for teachers early in their career? How do we ensure that a teacher's practice is impacting student performance as well? And measuring student performance is really an important factor in this. I clearly think we do need to define both the effectiveness of teachers and the effectiveness of students, how are students learning, and have multiple measures of what that effectiveness is. And throughout a teacher's career, provide her or him the kinds of support they need to continue to grow. I clearly don't believe just because someone is effective in year 1 and year 5, they're necessarily going to be effective in year 10, because things do change. And I think we have to put in place the kinds of systems that support teachers with quality professional development. And professional development that's aligned to the standards that you have in place, professional development that's aligned to the content that you're teaching, professional development that's aligned to what you want students to learn. One final thing that I want to just say about this is there is this myth out there that all of these, if a teacher challenges her or his termination, that it costs hundreds and thousands of dollars. We actually track everyone that we provide support at the NEA, and it is on average 80% of them are less than $5,000. It costs less than $5,000. So, but I actually think that's a very unimportant statistic. I think the most important statistic is what are we doing for children, and how do we best support children and allow teachers to do the job that they need to do.
So you've heard each other comment on many issues so far. I'm going to give you a chance to ask each other a question at this point in the conversation. Something that has been said that you might agree or disagree with, but push a point. Let's go ahead, Bill, with a question to Andy.
Sure. I would say, Andy, when you say that teachers are guaranteed lifetime employment, what experience do you have that demonstrates that teachers are guaranteed lifetime employment?
Yeah. So, of course, I want two parts of that. It is, in many cases, That is far too close to being true. Many times when teachers, and I know this from experience, I've worked for State Department of Education where we had to ultimately adjudicate tenure cases that came through the state commissioner. Often the cases that Bill was talking about where 80% of them teachers are 80% that cost less than $5,000. That's because in many of these cases, the teachers in question, often if your tenure laws cover non-teachers as well, that are educated for positions, it's because these folks have done the most egregious things, often leaving kids on buses overnight and not checking the bus, or they got a felony. Yes, those are pretty easy to adjudicate, and everyone recognizes that teacher, that professional ought to be exited. It's in the case of performance where it is so much more difficult to remove a teacher from a job. What's remarkable to me is every time I've gone to a school or talked to professionals, and asked this question to people, so to coach, a quiet voice, off to the side, are there any low-performing teachers in your school? Teachers always say yes, yes. Not all of my colleagues are great. And this has happened time and time and time again. And when you ask them why that's the case, they always give the same set of reasons. The administrators feel like they can't do anything. She's been here for a long time, she's part of the community, we're just going to gut it out for the next 7 years. Yes, technically you can, if you spend enough money and do enough stuff, make sure that all local teachers get out of the classroom. But the hurdles you have to jump over are too numerous and too high. I hope I get a chance to talk about like the bigger quilt here. But the question that I would like to leave with all of you is, are our educator policies aligned with the best interest of kids? It's hard for me to look at this tenure statute and other ones and say, yeah, this is going to do right by kids. And I agree with Bill with about teacher prep and PD and all these other things, but this is just one of the patches in the quilt that you have to look at and say it is adult-centered, not kid-centered.
Before Andy asks a question to Bill, I'm going to ask a couple more questions, and then we're going to change the format. So you've been listening to this conversation. You may or may not have answered some of the questions you have around tenure. I'm going to give you a chance to move into a conversation between the audience and the two speakers. So get your questions in mind, and we'll move to that. So, Andy, the question for Bill.
Yeah, could you just give some thoughts about teacher preparation programs and what role they should play in all this?
Sure. So I think teacher preparation programs are essential in all of this, and I think that we need to continue to look at, I'll start by saying I think that teacher preparation programs need to have a lot more clinical preparation. What do I mean by that? We need to have a lot more classroom type of experience for teachers before she or he becomes the teacher of record. We need to make sure that teachers are equipped to start their teaching career as a teacher of record right away. I'd love to, and there's all kinds of complications with this, but I'd love every teacher to have at least a year of practice, an internship of a year of clinical practice before they become the actual teacher of record. Too often, we throw young teachers into situations for which they're ill-equipped. And we have to ensure that doesn't happen. So for me, teacher preparation programs need to look at both assessing the extent to which they provide that kind of clinical experience, and two, what the results of their program are. And that creates some angst amongst people to say, we're going to assess your preparation program to determine to what extent are students performing in these issues, but I think it's something that we have to do. And how that's done, I think, is where we start to have the argument, which, if it's done, I think is less of an argument in the policy world.
So you just answered the question, put us into this conversation about the quilt. So if we're going to address tenure, it's going to have to be within a systematic approach. You both have said that preparation is the third thing. New improved preparation. You define it to a greater degree than just simply improving preparation. You talk about clinical practice. A closer connection between schools and higher ed institutions. You both said generally, and I'd like to address this in deeper conversation, change compensation systems. What are the other pieces that would be in that quilt that would support a quality reform of tenure. I'll ask both of you to sort of respond to that question. I think this is the critical question for the Prichard Committee and for policymakers. How do we put all these pieces together so that as we improve, modify, adjust tenure, there is a system that we have in mind, and there are other changes in this system that are necessary. So what would that be?
How much time do you have? This scope is enormous, and I think you hit on most of it. So if we just talk about teacher effectiveness, we have to think about what I call the life cycle. Even before teacher preparation programs, teacher recruitment efforts, then the preparation programs themselves, and then induction. So as Bill was referring to, what you do at the very beginning when they're still kind of in school, but then kind of teaching. Then what you do in the first couple of years, then have you have some sort of tenure review process, have you have teacher evaluations, have you have compensation systems, have you have promotion systems, and then have you have exiting systems when necessary. You have to think of those collectively, because if you get one out of the joint, the rest of them start to get wobbly as well. But then there are these other laws or parts of the education system that you have to think of as well. So accountability is one of them. So I think one reason that I'm more comfortable getting rid of tenure as we now know is because we have clearer alignment in incentives than ever before. We now know, because of public accountability rules that you are increasingly having in your city, that superintendents have they are being looked at very closely to make sure that they're running high quality schools. And principals, more than ever before, are being held accountable for running high quality schools. Once you get those things aligned, then principals no longer have any incentive whatsoever to get rid of their highest performers. They have the incentive to get rid of the lowest performers. So getting those things right. So how do we make sure that we have good tests, good assessments, good monitoring, good reporting of what's actually happening in the schools to make that happen. Let me just end sort of by taking a step back. I'm being really provocative because I think this is what you all need to grapple with. One of the most jarring sets of statistics I've ever come across in K-12 education is that how over time, increasingly the number of teachers that we have in the classroom, how many of them come from the bottom quartile of the SAT scores, entering college, and then from the bottom quartile of their college graduating class in terms of GPA. Some people say that in order for us to get ready for college and career readiness, that is succeed on Common Core standards and the new assessments that are in place, that is about oriented to about 1,200 on the old SAT that was made up of 2 parts. That's pretty high, 1,200. On average, you think, now if it's true in this state, the average teacher has about a 1,000 SAT score. What I'm trying to say is it possible that we have to be extraordinarily diligent over the next decade about getting the most high-performing new people into the classroom so we can get these new standards? In other words, if we want to actually be at the top of the nation, if we want to be able to compete with our international peers, we have to think completely differently about our teaching force. And then when we start to ask those questions, are the rules we have in place, like tenure, like compensation, like teacher preparation, are those aligned with those extraordinary high expectations? And in most states, they are not. So you need to look at this as a massive overhaul if you want to be serious about making sure that our best states can compete with the best states elsewhere, so we can reduce the achievement gap, make sure both of them have a fighting chance.
So Bill, what would you add to that?
So here's what I'd add. First of all, I'll start with Finland. In Finland, we asked the question about what do you do when you have teachers who are not performing the way that they should? And the answer was, we don't have any. We don't have any. Because they don't focus on this idea of, let's get rid of those bad teachers. They focus on the idea of professionalizing the profession from the start. Recruiting at the top level, absolutely. Providing the kind of preparation programs that we need. Doing the kinds of assessments that are important. Not focusing on narrow accountability for students, but really focusing on broad curriculum. So those are the kind, I think we have to think about this in terms of a broad picture. And I agree with a lot of what Andy had to say around the issue of recruitment and preparation, induction, mentoring, professional development as people are moving forward, quality evaluation systems that really take a look at what does professional teaching look like. We need to do a lot more work of engaging actually high-quality teachers in these discussions. That's one of the things I noticed when went to DC from Minnesota, all these think tanks talking about education, and there were no teachers involved in these discussions. And I think that's an important piece for us to look at as we're moving forward. When we talk about accountability, absolutely, we need to look at accountability. But not just for the teachers, not just for the administrators, not just for the school system itself, but for everything around it. How do we provide the kinds of support? How do we hold legislators accountable? How do we hold the unions accountable? How do we hold the administrators accountable, the public accountable, the students themselves accountable? So I think those are really important things for us to look at. So I would start with recruitment. I would end with quality professional development, assessing teachers as they're moving through the profession, and determining what our real focus and the most highest level impact can be.
Okay, let's assume that Kentucky's committed to these kinds of changes. And there's lots of evidence that this state is.
Yeah.
That we're going to do something about recruitment. We're going to improve our preparation programs. We're going to look at the ways in which we evaluate teachers much more effectively and so forth. You now are giving advice to the state and to the Commonwealth. What 2 to 3 changes, specific changes, would you make in our tenure clause?
So number one, to the extent that you still have tenure, it has to be, its acquisition and its maintenance must be contingent on demonstration of improving student performance. You don't get tenure, you do not keep tenure unless the boys and girls in your classroom are advancing. Number 2, make sure that there are real teeth for the or else. It can't just be where you're going to give professional development in perpetuity to a teacher who is low performing. It can't go on for 3, 4, 5 years. Why? Because boys and girls can't have 3 or 4 or 5 years worth of low performing teachers in front of their classrooms. And then the last thing is make sure that as you're performing the tenure roles, you are thinking about these other things. If you find out that one of your major universities is producing graduates who routinely have tenure taken away from them for being ineffective, that is a material finding. You need to go back to that preparation and say, no, we have to do something about that. Or if you were finding through a survey that all of your great fifth-year teachers are leaving because they're not making enough money, and your low-performing teachers are staying after their 5th year because they realize they can stay for another 20 years, get a pension, and everything will be fine, you have to start asking yourself questions. Do we have a compensation system that is aligned with our evaluation system, that is aligned with our ultimate goal of improving student learning?
What are your changes?
So I would start with figuring out how you really implement the law you have and see if you can do what you need to do under the law you have rather than engaging in a lengthy debate around it. So here's what I do. I would say we need to really focus on whatever the probationary period is, and in your case it's 4 years, and really focus on ensuring that teachers who meet the standards of the law have really met those standards by having quality teacher practice in their 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th year, impacting student learning in their 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th year. So I would start with that probationary period and really implement it, and we can't use excuses. We can't say, well, we can't do this, we don't have enough time, we don't have enough money. You might have to invest. You might have to invest in a probationary period. What kind of money can you put into that to ensure that principals have the wherewithal to do their job? And I'm not just talking about their skills, but we're putting principals in these situations where they have to run the school and then they have to run the instruction. And the question for us is that how do you use teachers in all of that in that probationary period, I think is important. I do think after the probationary period, we need to ensure that we have quality evaluation systems that really assess the performance of an educator to determine whether or not she or he has quality practice and to determine whether or not students are learning. And that student learning issue is not as easy as it looks. We have all kinds of simplistic measures. I just think we have to ensure that students are learning in all of that as well. So I think that's a part of the tenure process. I think your law probably allows you to do that now. The question is implementation in my mind.
All right, I'm going to open it up to questions from the audience. Jim, I'm going to go to you. There was this issue of recruiting high quality people, and I knew you'd made a comment to me at one time about this really isn't a marketing issue. Bless you.
And I love the work. It's important. There's no more important work being done in this state or in this nation than what we're talking about right here. And then 15 years as the university president that produced teachers, primarily for Kentucky. I had the retired CEO of Procter & Gamble from Northern Kentucky say to me in some exasperation, he pointed his finger at me and he said, "You've got to recruit your best students in teaching." And my response to him was, "John, this is not a marketing problem. This is not a marketing problem. This is a product problem. It is until we have wages," and Mark Tucker talks about this at some length, entering teachers' salaries that are comparable, in his case, to engineers. And until we pay based on performance, we're not going to get our best college students to go into teaching unless they are so motivated and passionate about the work and willing to make those sacrifices. But you can't scale based on that motivation, in my opinion. And I appreciate both of your comments on that. I think when you pay for longevity, not for performance, and when your pay is so far below those other fields that are now completely open. Remember, when we started this system, this was a field for women, for second careers. You had a captive audience. That's not true anymore. Everyone has other options, and we're not going to get those 1,200 plus until we change the system. And I don't want to sound overly simplistic about this, but I think if that doesn't change, nothing else does.
So, I'd like to respond to that. So let me tell you a little story. My son graduated with a degree in physics and then went to George Washington University for his graduate work in physics. I asked him if he was thinking about going into teaching. In fact, Montgomery County around us is really a high-paying school. He said, well, a couple of things. No, I can make more right up front. So it wasn't about pay for performance. It was about entry into the profession. And then he said, conditions are also an issue. He said, new teachers are put into this thing and they are working forever. And he said, I don't want that. And here's a guy, pretty good ACT score, 36 on math and science, and 30, anyway, it doesn't make any difference. But it was one of those things where he wouldn't even consider it. And the threshold question, first of all, was starting pay. And, you can't get into, so that's an issue. And then the other thing, I think in compensation, again, we have to be really thoughtful in that. I'm not a believer in paying teachers based on how well a student does, but I am a believer in paying teachers on how well they perform. And so there's a little distinction there. I don't want any teacher looking at a person, a student, saying, you're part of my pay equation. I think that could create some perverse incentives. At the same time, we clearly need to look at what we might be able to do with the compensation, starting with basic pay, and then how we move through a salary system, what we pay for, what kinds of responsibilities we have, how we assess the skills and knowledge that a teacher has to determine whether or not they're making a difference in student learning, I think are all parts of the equation.
So I would agree with one half of what you said, and maybe it's more than one half, and add to it, and then disagree passionately with the other half, which is something that I would like to encourage all of you to start to work on. So the part I agree, starting with the good stuff, is that yes, we have to have compensation systems that young, highly talented people can look at the teaching profession and say, I can build a career in there. I'm not going to get capped at $80,000 or whatever else it might be. The compensation throughout the career needs to make sense for those folks. But compensation is only one piece of that. We have to think of the pull factors of the teacher profession. If you want highly talented people to go into it, what are the attractions of it? Compensation would be one, but there are these other things that I've been talking about. Highly talented people don't want to go into a profession where effectiveness isn't rewarded, where they will keep their job with a low-performing person who's in the classroom next door. They want to be part of a system that's high-performing. So it's compensation and a good evaluation and all the things that go along. So that's the part that I agree. The part where I disagree is the astonishing, breathtaking lessons of Teach for America. We all believe that highly talented people don't want to go into the teaching profession for all these different reasons. Year after year after year now, 15–17% of Ivy League graduates are applying for Teach for America. The smartest young people from the best universities in America aren't just saying that they want to become teachers. They're saying, I want to teach in a low-income school. How is that possible? Well, it's possible because Teach for America did actually the promotion right. They did the framing right. They said that this is not just about kids, this is about our future, this is about civil rights, this is about social justice. And not all Teach for America folks stay beyond their 2 years, but many do. But it just proved that we can get the best and the brightest if we talk about this the right way. And now Teach for America, I think every year gets about 10,000 applicants. And they only are able to
50.
hire
50,000.
and many of them are from the best universities, so they get their pick of the litter. And these are young people who could be making much, much more, and they could be doing many other things. They say, I love kids, I love public education, I want to be in this business. So I would just say to all of them, don't make excuses. Don't say we can't get the best and the brightest, because Teach for America is not only shown that they can do it nationwide, they can do it and send kids to the Mississippi Delta, Oakland, to Cleveland, to the most low-income and most disadvantaged areas possible. Take it upon yourself and say, if they can do it, why can't you come?
So one of the things I would, in response to the whole TFA thing, I think we have to be really clear about what the impact is on. There's an issue when you talk about students. What is the impact on students of Teach for America kids coming in to having 6 weeks of preparation into schools of highest need and then leaving, the whole turnover question. So I think we have to really look at that. No question about the impact in recruiting the highest, high-quality people coming out of college. The question I would say is what has the impact been on students, and I think the results are mixed, and I think we have to be very, very, very careful about saying that what they're doing is necessarily having a real quality impact on students.
Next question.
Is it working for me? I don't hear too terrible amount of difference between what you're saying, but what I do see is a common hurdle, and that is what do we do to actually stimulate the student-centered, performance-based, whatever you call it, a tenure system, a promotion system, a rewarding system, whatever you call it. What is the state of affairs in actually achieving that in the laws? I know you were talking about procedures and policies that kind of hinder the implementation of tenure laws effectively. So what is being done, and how can Prichard committee members advocate for changing those policies, whether if you can't get the law changed, you know the law moves forward, what can you do to get the policy changed, and where are the systems working to move towards the performance-based systems?
Well, yeah, there are model laws out there now by a whole lot of different nonprofit organizations, Medical Center for Future Quality, Students First, and on and on. Or you can just go to some of the states that have done this since call it 2009, who have not just changed their tenure laws, but done the cascading policies as well, compensation, PE, on and on and on. So there are good laws out there, but I think we all have to be prudent about this, and I'll put myself into that. These laws are new, and they're still being implemented, and the implementation is extraordinarily difficult. Some of the early results we're seeing from these new evaluation systems are suggesting that they're getting the same results as the old evaluation systems, which to Bill's point suggests that this has to be a culture change. This has to be a change in the way that we implement it. So there are lots of good laws out there. New Jersey did something good. It was much more modern than, say, maybe Tennessee was, but there were probably, I forget the exact number, somewhere between 18 and 26 states that adopted laws and did something in LIFO, tenure, compensation, evaluation over the past 5 or 6 years.
I think we have a great opportunity with the implementation of the Common Core State Standards to ensure that the standards are in place, to ensure that teachers are prepared to implement, to ensure that students are meeting those standards with the right kinds of assessments in place. I think you have a great opportunity to do that within and looking at the Common Core State Standards. I think across the country, we have an opportunity to say to every child that here are standards that we want you to meet. And we're going to prepare teachers to ensure that they can implement those. We're going to prepare school districts to ensure that they have the resources needed to implement the standards. I think it's just a great opportunity for us in this country if we don't get hung up in a political debate and we really take a look at what's best for students.
Can I just want to do that? I really agree, because Common Core provides, it's going to be scary, but that's a huge opportunity. Come 2014, 2015, when the first set of assessment results come out, whether you guys are still in smart balance or your chief decides to go in some different direction, you're going to see vast numbers of your kids who you thought were proficient are no longer considered proficient. That is, they are no longer going to be considered ready for college and career or on that path. So as Wayne Gretzky famously said, you need to skate where the puck is going to be. So if you look forward to 2015 and say our state is going to be in dire straits then, we're going to be really worried, what can you start to do right now to prepare for that? And that's why the recruitment of new teachers becomes so much more important, getting much more rigorous about your teacher prep programs, all those things that go along with it. Anchor yourselves to let's talk about 2015 when all of a sudden a bunch of people are going to have their jaws on the ground. And what you might want to think about doing is recently PISA, the OECD, has a pseudo agreement with America, which is a nonprofit organization that allows states and schools and districts to actually give PISA this high quality international assessment to show you how your kids are doing, not just compared to folks in Tennessee or Maryland, but to Finland and Taiwan and some of our international competitors. And the first go around of this just happened this past year, and it was a pilot, so the schools and districts didn't have to say what their results were, but some did, and some were brave enough to say, wow, we are nowhere close to being where we need to be. Some of them were actually better than they expected, but the big story here is most schools, districts, states that participate in this didn't release their results, and I think there's a reason for that. I'm telling you, 2015 is going to be shocking if these assessments are as tough as we expect, and they said tough cut scores, and we stick to that, start skating where that puck's going to be.
Gentlemen, the handout that we have says that 4 states in the last 2 to 3 years have eliminated tenure. What can we learn from those 4 states? What have they experienced, good or bad?
I don't think we can learn much at this point yet. I think that is an analysis we have to continue to do around all of these changes that we're making. To what extent is it impacting student learning? And so I don't think we can make any drawing conclusions yet in terms of impact of student learning, but I would argue that all of this should be assessed as we move forward to see what is really happening to student learning. How are we changing what's happening to children in every school, in the poorest schools in the state, and the richest schools in the state? And so how are we doing there? So I don't think there's a lot of conclusions we can draw yet in terms of student learning. The final thing that I'll say about that is, as we do assessments, we have to really, all of us, I think, be honest with the kinds of assessments that we do. 2 words that have lost real value to me since I've been in DC is research-based. Because we all have an opinion, and then we find research to support it. And I think we have to really take a serious look at whatever we're doing and assess it, and see to what degree can we come together with people who have different points of view and do honest assessment of what's happening to students with any changes that we're making.
So what I would agree that the states that have changed tenure in substantial ways too soon to tell. The figure that like this, if you want to remodel your house and you decide you're going to knock down the load-bearing wall, something that has helped the things stay up for a while, you better make sure that you have something in its place. That is, if there are 2 states, I will name them, both of which got rid of tenure. One of them has really thoughtful policies in place when it comes to recruiting great teachers, holding teacher preparation programs accountable, monitoring their performance over time, making sure that the evaluations of teachers work well, making sure they're preparing their principals to fairly evaluate teachers. In that set of circumstances, you get rid of tenure, and at least the theory would suggest they're going to make use of that. Remember, policy is just an environment. Implementation is everything. If you get rid of tenure and you don't do anything with teacher prep program, don't do anything with PD, don't get your principals prepared to fairly observe teachers and have good evaluations, nothing's going to come of it all. So you have to be working on these parallel tracks at the same time, I would say.
I've had a wonderful experience of having 4 years under a superintendent who knew something about running the school system effectively. I haven't heard a lot from you all about preparation for superintendency, but to me, having watched it for so long, that was the most important thing in our school system to see a change was the quality of the superintendent and his effectiveness. What he did was, he said to his principals, I'm holding you accountable for what happens in your school. I'll give you any help I can. You ask me for it, I'll provide it. But I'm holding you accountable. And if you don't produce good results from your teaching, you're accountable were a great number of principals who did the best essentially, and the ones who took it seriously, who evaluated the teachers, who held them accountable, and who got results are still with us. We had a lot of pushback in relation to that from primarily teachers who were not high performers. The ones who were high performers welcomed him and what he was doing in the system. But our board did not renew his contract because of the pushback. And we progressed way up the ladder in the state rankings in terms of our results. We said about our loss of him. But I wonder from your perspective, how important you feel it is to have a superintendent who is willing to take the pushback or holding people accountable and very meeting because he was interested in children in the system.
So, first, if you talk about preparation, I think preparation for quality of every adult that's in the school is essential. We need to ensure that every adult that is there is interested in what's happening to students, number one. That's what we're there for. We're not there for the adults, we're there for the children. So that's the first thing we need to do. Secondly, we have to create systems whereby not only the teachers, but the superintendent and the principals feel supported. So how does the school board, school district fit into that and creating that kind of environment as well? A lot of this has to do with environment and conditions that are in school, the conditions that we put superintendents and principals into. The other thing that I would say is, again, we have to really evaluate to what extent, what is the job we really want a superintendent to do or a principal? Are they the instructional leader, or are they running the bus garage, or are they doing all of that? And to what extent do we put them in almost an untenable situation, I think is a question we have to answer. But clearly, up and down the line, we should all support people who are interested in accountability for student results. What that accountability is, I think, is always open for debate, but we shouldn't shirk that responsibility, whether it's the union, the association in our case, whether it's principal, a school board, administrators, the legislature, the community. We all should be accountable, and there should be consequences if we're not being successful.
I have to do that. So I've heard that your story too many times in the past, and it's heartbreaking. I think I would associate myself with just about everything Bill said on that. One thing, and this is one of my most provocative beliefs, so maybe I'll just say it, and then you can test me forever afterwards, but I think it's important. We need to think about governance of the school system as much as we think of personnel. There's something very important, I think, about the democratic nature of our public schools, and I want the public to have a voice in it. That there are so many times that I hear stories like this that elected school boards do things that aren't always in the best interest of kids. So I'm really curious about a state that is willing to take a look at that. How can you make sure that the public has a voice, meaning democratic elections for something, and making sure that boards, for whatever political reasons or reasons why it must be board for school boards, keeping them from standing in the way of professionals doing their job. The places that seem to have the most progress are states and districts, where they have continuity among high-quality board members and superintendents, and then they can have that effect on teachers and principals. The ones where you just have this rapid turnover because someone ran for a local school board because he or she wanted to run for state representative in 2 years. Or someone decided to be a local school board member because they had an axe to grind about a special education case. Being a school board member is extraordinarily difficult. There are budgetary issues involved, personnel issues, standards and testing, all this stuff. It's not a job for everybody,